1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Put it down, put it up. Okay. I wait for a signal from your side then. Yeah, sure. No problem. Okay, then once again, hi. I'm Enno. I'm going to talk about kid tracking technologies and their risk and applications, which is a pretty uncommon subject for a talk, at least for me. So I'm glad to see some people here. I mean, it's a uncommon subject for a talk, and it's a first talk on the second day, which is thankless the schedule point, kind of. The agenda is I want to introduce you to the technology, then I'll talk about some approaches, how to get a feeling if the technology is a good thing or a bad thing or something. I'll take something like a hacker's approach, how to attack this kind of a technology. I'll take the risk analysis approach. Is it good or is it bad? What's the benefit? Do we gain something as for safety or security of kids, or do we even maybe lose? And last but not least, I'll give some kind of notes on the social implications of that stuff. That stuff has been covered elsewhere much better than I can, but just to throw in some personal notes on the social implications. Some words on my person. I'm a kind of, usually I call myself an old school networker. That's what I am. I like working on a layer 2 to 4. Everything above that is some strange applications stuff I do not understand really, and I do not care for. I'm a frequent speaker on different conferences. Usually I have subjects like MPLS security or voice of IP security, virtualization security, stuff like this, and there I have some demos, so at least in this talk, even though it's a bit uncommon for me, I don't have any demos, so don't expect any practical stuff here. It's a purely theoretical talk, which might turn into some practical stuff later in some years. Some notes on the background. I had some discussion with my wife. We have 2 kids. On this technology, would it be a good thing to be able to track the kids? I mean, every mother is scared about kid getting kidnapped or having an accident, being somewhere without being able to contact the doctor or whatever. So there is some pretty appealing aspect in that for parents. And I had, when we talked about that, I did not have, let's say, a good feeling about that. I thought, oh no, I don't like the stuff. That's strange. And I had to convince her why it is strange. And I wrote down some things. And being in Dayton in the last days, so I knew I had some work to be done in Dayton in April. Brian, Angus Fight, he told me there was a cool conference, Notacon, going on, and maybe this could be a good place to talk about this stuff, and that's why I'm here. So into the technical details, those technologies I call kid tracking technologies are a kind of subset of technologies which are sometimes have the title location-based services, which implies location, locate something, and then offer some service based on the location. Maybe locate if somebody is in his office or he's not in his office, and then redirect the call. This is a simple example of a location-based service. And these location-based services usually locate some kind of asset, some kind of electronic piece that's located. One could be tempted to replace that electronic piece by locate a human, but in fact it's still the electronic piece you locate. It's not a human. Maybe it's a human who carries it, but it's still the electronic piece, and this may turn out interesting in a security context later. The communications protocols which are used might be RFID with implants on a short range. They might be Wi-Fi, WiMAX, Bluetooth. There is a whole space of location-based services built on Wi-Fi that's currently evolving, and it might be GPS. Those are the three main, let's say, protocols involved. And we have some components, usually just some kind of sender. Throughout the talk, I'll mainly talk about those senders used as implants. This is a picture from a guy, pretty prominent for the RFID stuff he does. He even wrote a book, RFID Toys. That guy has RFID implants in his hands, which are here X-rayed. And he uses that stuff for access control to his house and to start his car and stuff like this. So there is some sending instance. There is some communication means. There is a receiver receiving the signal, and some backend database. These are the components included in the whole picture. With RFID, you usually there is some specialty that the sender, or the tag as it's mostly called in RFID context, gets its energy from the so-called reader, which might not be only a reader but also a writing device. But that's the same thing as with smart card readers who don't necessarily read. It's not a right term, but a common term. With our RFID, as I said, the specialty is the thing receives its energy from here, from a magnetic field, so it doesn't need an internal energy source. What does happen? That sending instance, that sending device stores some data, which might simply be an ID consisting of 32 bits, for example, and there may be additional data, for example, medical records on that sending device. This ID, and if needed, the data is transmitted to the receiver. This receiver might be, in the case of GPS, it's a satellite. In case of RFID or Wi-Fi, might be some receiving entities in public spaces. Whenever you enter a building, you pass through with your RFID tag, and so you can be located. This guy is in this building currently. When you leave it, again, and some read access to that device, and so it gets known you're no more in the building. So it might be gates, it might be a satellite, some point where you transmit your data to. The ID, in case of RFID, might be usually is mapped to a set in a database, which identifies the asset further. So it might not be your personal data, like your name on the tag, just the ID. But once you identify that ID in the database, it's clear. Okay, that's John Miller from Cleveland. He has that age. He has those medical records. So all the stuff usually is in a database. It's not on the tag or sending device. And the exact location, then, this is the whole thing. Exact location of that electronic piece may be located and tracked and displayed in some sense to authorized parties, maybe via web interface. A mother of a kid might be able, okay, I want to know where is my kid currently, logs into some SSL page, and there's a land map, and you can see, okay, my kid currently is on the way home, or is still in school, or is out at a swimming pool, or whatever. This is what the whole thing is about. There's a lot of standards in the RFID space. The standards itself are not important here. it's more important there is a lot of standards which might lead to incompatibilities and stuff we will cover later. This is just to give you an idea how the data is organized on those tags. There is some serial number, and one might be, depending on the standard, might be able to store data on tags. Short comparison of the communication technologies as for their range, those technology I mentioned, as for their power source. With RFID, there's no power source. With Wi-Fi or GPS, you need a power source, which might be a problem when it's in your body. As I already said, I'm going to talk about implants. But technology evolves, and there are plans and technologies which might enable you to have something like in this size, like a piece of a finger, somewhere within your body, which has a small battery and is able to transmit data within a given range. So what's the purpose of this stuff? Kid tracking in case of accidents, or let's say human tracking, which may be kids. This is the main subject of my talk, which may be delinquents on probation. There it's currently used, already used. Prevention of kidnapping by tracking, being able to track kids, or access control. Big thing in all that is access control, access to buildings. The Mexican general attorney had such a thing implanted 2 years ago to be able to access rooms with classified data. And him and some employees got implants. So one could control who can enter some room just by that implant and an RFID set. Access to laptops. This is what that guy does, where I showed the X-rays. At Notacon, there was a guy who got access to his laptop by some implant he had somewhere in his arm. And Major Malfunction cloned that later on, which was funny. But I get back to that. Or that might simple control to access to drinks at some stuff like RoboBar. I'm not sure if you heard of RoboBar. It's as the name implies, a kind of automated bar where you can get drinks 24/7. But this stuff has to check: is the person who wants to get a drink allowed to get a drink as for the age? And so you might have some implant. Just show it to the RoboBar. This implant or the database tells, hey, I'm more than 20 years old. I should be able to get a drink. So control of access to something is one of the big purposes of this technology. Some examples where this is already used, mostly in the form of badges, not implants. But the next step, lots of companies and researchers are envisioning is do all this stuff with not with badges but with implants. Delinquents on probation, there is already used. They are allowed to stay at home, so you save a place in prisons, but they are not allowed to leave their homes. So they have some kind of bracelet, and whenever this bracelet gets out of range of some receiver, some authority might be informed, hey, he's leaving his home. There was some stuff with kids at some school in California where the kids got equipped with bracelets to be able to track them within the school. There were a lot of parents' protests, and that's why they stopped the project. There is some stuff, the Ottawa Citizen, where Alzheimer patients got bracelets to be able to track them once they get lost. The FDA has admitted special chips for medical records, implants in fact. That stuff is about implants. Such an implant could look like, you won't be able to see it from more than some meters away from me, but to give you an idea, this is the stuff I'm talking about as for implants. Yeah, Brian. You can easily inject it with a needle, and remember that picture of the guy. There are some theme parks who give away bracelets for kids to be able to track them whenever the parents lose them, and the stuff is used in pets and cattle already on a wide scale. Some questions that arise when discussing this technology. There are two obvious questions. I will cover lots of things in my talk. As I said, this talk is writing down some unstructured or random thoughts on the whole subject. But first obvious question is, who runs the database? Who runs the infrastructure being able to track people? Is it the government? Are private corporations doing it? If so, what about trust and privacy and all this stuff? Usually governments tend to do things not themselves, but buy services from private corporations for that stuff. This brings up the question, who watches the watchers? Who watches what they do with that data? Who watches who can access the data? And one interesting side aspect might be, how will the SLAs look like? If you subscribe to such a service as a parent, what can they guarantee as for the reachability and the reliability of the system? This is interesting when you think about it. Second obvious question is access control. Who has access to what data? Only the parents? What about the grandparents? What about nannies? What about teachers? What about which authentication methods are used there? What if you ask your neighbor, can you take care of my kid in the afternoon? Should you give him access to the system? If so, how do you remove that access? Is it based on some physical stuff like two-factor authentication? If so, you can hand it over to your neighbor, but what if you lose it? And all that. There are a lot of questions which are still unclear about this technology. What about medical records in the case of unconsciousness? You have an accident, you have medical records in your implant. Who do you allow to access the data? Obviously, it should be the doctor taking care of you, but how do you authorize him? And how can you guarantee it's not somebody else? This is still unclear. Who audits the access? Again, contractual requirements. What about SLAs? How and when and with what guarantees to access those data? These are two very obvious questions. Others will arise throughout the talk. Taking a hacker's approach, look at this technology and try to I mean, most of us here in the room are in some way, we regard ourselves as hackers in whatever sense of the word. Try to have a hacker's approach. How can I break? Or how can I circumvent or explore? To use a more neutral word. Explore the technology. Just applying common attack methods. Different things come into mind easily. What about spoofing? When a person appears to be in a place, but in fact is not. If somebody who wants to kidnap your kid can pretend the kid is still in school, but the kid isn't, he captured it, he gains a lot of time. It will devaluate the whole value of the system from the parent's view. Kids might try that themselves. Hey, I could be tracked with that stuff from my parents. How can I escape from the tracking? The nerd in class becomes popular at once, as he might be able to implement that stuff. What about information gathering on unauthorized access? Somebody breaking into the system could do that with the intent to find out where is some person currently, or could do it, think of a pedophile. Are there any girls at the age of 8 or 10 here in my environment at the moment? I mean, it's information, and it's information which should be accessible to some authorized persons and not accessible to unauthorized. This is what the whole field of computer security is built on, some way, be able to have a distinction between unauthorized and authorized access. Once this distinction gets broken, lots of problems may arise. What about cloning? Those of you who were at ShmooCon might remember Major Malfunction's talk. There was a guy, the Major Malfunction gives great presentations. He presented on RFID and cloning. And during the talk, it turned out the night before, he met a guy who was at ShmooCon who uses an implant to get access to his laptop. And he asked that guy, could you please come to the presenter's desk? And he, on the fly, live demo, he cloned that stuff and was able to get access to that guy's laptop. Nice demo. Great talk. And I mean, being able to clone that stuff, even if they try to prevent it, technology evolves. Once you're able to clone, the whole security of the system is broken. Obviously, denial of service might be a problem. One might be able to attack the infrastructure, the database behind it. There are some researchers from the Netherlands who run a website, RFID Virus. They already wrote some viruses for RFID systems. And being able to write something which contaminates people by RFID is quite interesting, as the word virus gets a bit back to its initial connotation. It's normal electronic stuff, but you carry it with you. All classic database attacks might come into mind. Thinking about that a bit further, taking a terrorist approach, one might be able, once you're able to track a person, you might be able to attack that person in a targeted way. Just attack all persons which have some citizenship, or if that one is not stored, one could still be able to correlate it from the window of the chip or something. Being in Cleveland, maybe you know that tires are getting tagged since many years. There is, I think there's some agreement in the tire industry to be able to track them for inventory reasons and whatever. Once you find out there must be some database, or it shouldn't be too far-fetched to imagine a database where every car is, there's an inventory of the cars with the tires for maintenance reasons and stuff. Once you get access to the database, one could place a landmine which goes up when some tech comes along. I mean, I'm from Germany, and in Germany, we at the moment we have a big debate on the terrorist attacks from the 70s, as those guys are being released from prison at the moment. And there have been such attacks. When General Attorney of Germany came along, they brought up a bomb in a paper bin, and they had to know what, you have to target somebody, which might be much easier with this technology. Second approach, what I did when I tried to get a feeling why this is a bad thing, I took the risk analysis approach. I'm a guy from IT security, and usually I very often use an approach when I have to prioritize or evaluate technologies. What do I gain? What do I lose security-wise? And use stuff I call risk analysis, which is a formal approach. One can take formulas and Excel sheets and stuff to be able to get a feeling if is this good for security or is this bad for security. Everybody of us permanently does some risk analysis on an informal way in daily life. I assume most of you are, maybe aside from some hangover from yesterday, feeling pretty good in this room right now. This might be different if this room was in Baghdad or in Kabul or somewhere, imagine another place. Still, you feel safe. You feel safe as you're in Cleveland. You feel safe as this is a hotel which has a roof. Maybe we are not currently Cleveland is not currently under terrorist attack. There are no planes crashing into Cleveland. All this we take into some account when we judge our daily situation. The same goes for crossing a street. There's a car approaching 50 meters away. Some people cross the street, some others don't. That's risk analysis. And whenever trying to understand the technology, risk analysis is a good approach to understand the benefits or costs of a technology. For example, this is what Bruce Schneier does. Bruce Schneier has some pretty good discussions on sky marshals. He tried to put into account, okay, we have a risk, terrorist attack on a plane, which we might mitigate with sky marshals. That risk is 1 plane out of 1,000,000. Probability 1 of 1,000,000, mitigated risk, loss of injuries and deaths or mitigation of that. And on the other side, there are people guns carrying at planes, so they have to maintain that guns. There may be accidents. They might get some attacker might get into the plane, take the gun away from the sky marshal, and this stuff. And taking all this into account, it might not be a good idea to put sky marshals in planes. So just put it all into a mathematical formula. And this is a good approach when one leaves aside the emotional stuff. Staring at some technology, it's always a good idea to ask yourself, what are the requirements, the benefits, the side effects? Are there new threats arising from some technology? And doing this on that kit tracking stuff, 2 categories of risks must be considered. Those risks that the technology is supposed to mitigate, and maybe some risks that are newly introduced or induced by the technology. And risk is, one should take into account the probability of an event and the consequence. And doing this with kit tracking, and regarding threats like accidents, insufficient medical treatment, getting lost somewhere, kidnapping, delinquent leaving a house, this is a kind of threat from the governmental or authority view. He shouldn't leave his house. He might be dangerous, so keep him in the house by monitoring him. One gets to, taking this risk analysis approach, one gets to interesting results. I'll pick some examples here. Talking about accidents, this makes tracking kids in case of accidents makes only sense with GPS technology. It doesn't make sense with RFID or Wi-Fi, as accidents may happen outside the city. Within cities, you might be able to track them with RFID or Wi-Fi, going through gates, passing public buildings and stuff, but that's not, you want to track your kid when it's going to skiing. As a parent, this might be an approach. But kids have mobile phones anyway. They can wear, for medical records, additional bracelets. And talking about implants, there is no, how can you ensure the stuff is still working if there was an accident? If somebody has something in his arm and is injured, you can't really ensure that the stuff is still working, which is much easier wearing a bracelet. You can put metal stuff there which can break in a case of accident, all that stuff. So for accidents, I think this is not the right technology. Talking about kidnapping, one can, the second big thing that comes into minds of anxious parents or scared parents. I should use this to prevent my kid from kidnapping. If the attacker in that case is a skilled and motivated attacker, this is what we call them in a risk analysis. We have a skilled motivated attacker, or we have a kind of like a script kid or whatever. If the attacker is skilled and motivated, he will certainly be aware of the possibility of a kid being chipped. So what will an attacker, a kidnapper in that case, do? Using blocking techniques, put a kid into a shielded cage, for example, which might even deteriorate the kid's conditions during the kidnapping. And the most important point here is it might be much easier for that kind of attacker. It's just risk analysis. Take one risk, in this case, a kidnapper. This risk might be much bigger with that technology, as it's the same kidnapper who had to track school buses and stuff for several weeks before to find out where is this kid going, at what time, and stuff. And now he just has to break into a system, or to bribe an employee of the corporation running the whole system to find out, okay, I just have to pick that kid at that time, at that point. So from the big picture, just taking the formal risk analysis approach, the risk situation with the technology is probably worse than without. So you don't really, as from parents' view, you don't really gain anything. This was one of the points which persuaded my wife when I talked with her about that. And another risk may be attacks by I call that an occasional attacker, somebody who's driven by some sense of whatever, some strange things going on in his mind. The technology won't help anyway. You won't be able to mitigate this risk, and there might even be situations which worsen the whole stuff for your kid if it has such technology, or if such technology was in place, widespread. The attacker might react in some not so good way there. And still in the formal risk analysis approach, there is new risks might be introduced by the technology itself. Your body might not tolerate it. An attacker might be able, I mean, there's a transmission. You can destroy Wi-Fi in the Wi-Fi context, or I've not heard of that stuff in GPS, but with RFID or Wi-Fi, you can destroy text by overpowering them in some sense. This might be a risk. There might be side effects on things like pacemakers. Imagine scenario: two teenagers kissing each other for the first time, and her heart starts beating very fastly, and it's not because she kisses the guy, but as the guy has some technical implant, and she has a pacemaker, and there is some side effect on this. The biggest risks, from my understanding, which might be imposed by this technology, is modified parents' behavior. Parents might think we can track him anyway. We don't have to wait until he's out of sight, or we don't have to wait until he entered the building. We can track him anyway. So parents' behavior might change, and there might be a loss of dignity or privacy for the kids, which leads us to the social implications of that stuff. I already said the whole social discussion on the social implications has been done at other places with much more knowledge and depth than I could. And there's a very readable book called Spy Chips, which I recommend reading, on RFID technology and its abuses. So I just want to give some random thoughts in this part of the talk. After the hackers approach and the risk analysis approach, I just want to give some feelings I have on this, or some questions that might arise. I have three parts here. The first I call the panopticon, the second will be on insertion and removal, and third on correlation. As for the panopticon, this is a term which is gained some widespread knowledge by a discussion from a French philosopher called Michel Foucault. One of his main works is Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison. I have some background in the humanities space, so I had some contact with Michel Foucault, and he describes something he calls a panopticon, which is not in his term, but somebody else brought up the term. And the panopticon is a kind of building where there's the center there's a tower, and around the tower there is some peripheral building which is divided into cells. And in each cell there's a person, and those cells have a window on the inside and on the outside, so light comes through. And in the tower there are windows which inhibit seeing if there is somebody in the tower or not. So you can, with one person, you can easily guard all the cells around you. This is the principle of the panopticon, which is still used. I was told that US Postal uses this kind of stuff in their places where all the packets are processed. The packets not in IP packets, but physical ones. They have windows from supervisor cabinets or cabinets, and you can't, walking on that packet, you don't know if there's somebody behind that window or not. But you could be observed if you steal something. This is the panopticon principle. And as I said, the person being in such a panopticon is subject to a permanent visibility. So the panopticon can be thought of as a mechanism of omnipresent permanent surveillance. And this is exactly what kid tracking induces from a kid's perspective. It destroys the dignity and privacy. You are under constant, or the kids are put on a constant feeling, hey, daddy and mom will be able to track where I am. Imagine what this does mentally wise. It might produce streamlined kids in the sense, oh, I shouldn't go there. They will notice I'm leaving my normal way back from school to home. I shouldn't do that. This will have vast implications on the way of thinking and the way of obedience, so we impose on our kids. A second unordered or random thought I want to throw into it is the question of insertion and removal. When should such a thing be inserted? Evidently, that could be at birth. They currently do that. Newborns in clinics get bracelets to be able to track them, either by GPS or RFID. The more interesting question is, when should it be removed? Should it be removed at all, or maybe the kids grow up with the feeling, hey, I have some implant. This implant has advantages and disadvantages. Sure, it could be tracked, but I have nothing to hide, and I can easily go into places where I want. I can pay with that. Maybe there is some comfort with wearing it, so why should you remove it? But thinking about removal, the question come up, when should it be removed? At the age of 5 or 10, or when they become adolescents and develop their own sense of liberty and non-obedience, or talking more formally at the age of drinking or at the age of emancipation or consent, or whatever, which brings up questions, what if you cross some boundaries then? And in one state it's 18, in another state it's 21. You certainly don't want to be tracked while on spring break. This is the second question that comes up thinking about the technology. And I think the most interesting stuff, or I had when I had the discussion with my wife, is in the space of what I call correlation. For scared parents, it might only be a very small step from the question, where is she currently, to the question, what's she doing there, and who else is there? I mean, from a parent's view, those are, it's not too far-fetched, those questions, and thinking about who else is there, why are there, okay, who else is there? Isn't this a place where put him on whatever minority you can put in, those people, they sell drugs, what's she doing there? Those people practice some sexual practices. What's my kid doing there? What's she doing at the gates of the abortion clinic? What's she doing with Robbie on the men's toilet. Remember Romeo and Juliet? This thing might never be happened, as they were from families which were enemies. What's she doing together with somebody from that family? All this, this small step, thinking about it, and the question is, what is she doing there? Not only with whom, by some data correlation, but what? And technically, this is easy to answer. Whenever such a technology is in place, you can easily correlate the information where is somebody with information from urban surveillance cameras, which are in place anyway. So who else is there? You could combine it with facial recognition. Who are those guys together with my girl there? You might be able to correlate with credit card data or gain context by whatever mechanisms, MySpace, Google Map, all those technologies which I am here, and who of my friends are here too. Just correlate this data, and you might get from a parent's or from an authority's view, get interesting data. And those were the three kind of things that came up when discussing this stuff. The panopticon thing, which I absolutely do not like. The question for correlation, the question for insertion and removal. Think about this stuff. I just the main intent of this talk is not so much providing technical information, but more than discuss some technology, even if so far it's mostly a monologue. But discuss the technology and make you think about this stuff. So I can summarize that there are technologies to track humans. They exist, and there are they evolve. Things get smaller. People get implants. There are patents on lots of this stuff already in place. Anxious parents might find these technologies appealing to prevent some risks. Undertaking a risk analysis approach might show you don't really mitigate the risks, you bring up new risks, that the whole situation might be worse than before. And furthermore, those technologies erode on a large scale. Without implication, we can really understand now children's privacy and dignity. And as a father, I can say, I do not want this for my kids. So, finished here. This is my slide for questions. I titled it here, Questions and Discussion, as I did not really give a technical talk. Anything somebody wants to add, or questions, whatever. 2 questions, I start here. Which one, the RFID stuff? Yeah, the RFID stuff, there has to be external power source. So it can't be queried, it has to be there, but all the other stuff, I mean, the terms I use, sender and receiver, are not entirely correct in a technical sense. Think of it two parties communicating. Whoever starts the communication. It's not in every context, it's the same as for the client and the server speaking network.
I have read the book that you were talking about, RFID Toys, and the gentleman, the photographs you showed, where he went up and had the RFIDs into the web of his hand. My take on the first 2/3 of the book, as he did his car, his computer, the security and so forth, he was exploring the technologies. However, my take on the last third of the book was, do we realize the danger, and if we do turn this technology loose, on the abuse, as you have pointed out, and a man who went so far to has actually had the implants, experimented with them, say he's an expert, but he's a lot more knowledgeable than I am. I really appreciated the last part where he said, hey, it is everyone's responsibility. Please be aware of what we are introducing into society. This could be a very bad thing as well.
Yeah. Thanks for that comment. In fact, this is the guy the gentleman was talking about. His name is Amal Grafstra. He has a website dedicated for that stuff, and he wrote a book which is called RFID Toys. If you want to get some knowledge on the technology, and my presentation was just a starting point. If you want to dig into this stuff, I recommend reading the RFID Toys book, which you can easily spot here, and the Spy Chips books. Those are two good starting points aside from my presentation. Anything else as for comments or questions?
Do you have any comments? I mean, we're talking about RFID in general, but what about all the stuff they're putting in all of the in all of our products? You know, Walmart's mandating it. It's basically, it doesn't matter whether it's in us or not, because everything the blue jeans will be wearing will be tagged, and if they can track that through the credit card purchase at the point of sale, you know, do you have any thoughts on basically what's happening is everything around us, everything is going to have an RFID in it. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, in the sense, I mean, I deliberately excluded the discussion of RFID tags in things from my talk, but the main problem I see is, as you point out, data correlation. Once assets are tagged and data is correlated in some sense, it might be, or it would be easy to track people even without implants. There are some, I think it's, I don't remember who, but lots of corporations, there are some corporations which started taking their uniforms to have an inventory of uniforms, and when they get washed, where are they, and things. And once you can correlate this data with the people wearing the uniforms, you can track the people by tracking the uniforms and not the humans. And it should be easy to track. Once you can correlate data, this jeans was bought with that credit card, or this jeans is worn by somebody who has this ID on his driver's license. It will be easy to track people not based on their implants, but on other sources of data. Thank you for that comment.
Are you aware of any court cases or legal cases where RFID has been presented as evidence in like a crime or something like that?
Yeah, not.
Where it might be considered authoritative?
Not yet. I doubt with that simple generation of transponders, which are called tags, this will be possible, as has been shown by Major Malfunction and others. There's a researcher, Jonathan Westhus. As long as you can clone them, this destroys the whole chain of evidence, which might be based in some RFID context. There are newer generations which work with authentication and cryptographic stuff, which might mitigate the risks of cloning or spoofing or whatever. But I never, to get back to your question, I never heard of any case where there was some RFID-based evidence or something. Yes. Okay.
Now, getting back to this one thing about tracking people without their knowledge, you know, like even the cell phones, you know, that they, in Los Angeles, for an example, they will track the rate of traffic unbeknownst to people who happen to have cell phones. But basically, they have a tracking service on the internet that will basically track through data that they get from a cell phone provider how fast the traffic's moving along a certain stretch of freeway. And so, and that data is all available. I mean, granted, the cell phone companies aren't going to be selling that data to, just anybody, but they'll sell it to, the NSA, And so any thoughts on where this technology is going in terms of now we all have Blackberries and we'll all have, Bluetooth headsets and all of that kind of stuff. Any final conclusions on where we're all going with this?
I mean, I didn't know that case from, you said LA, was that?
Yeah, Los Angeles. They basically are able to just track, traffic. You can go to a website like right now and see how fast the traffic's moving in Los Angeles based on passive responders of people's cell phones who don't even know they're part of this study. And actually, it may have just been a study. It may not be online now, but they showed the feasibility of basically using passive tracking of cell phones, just from where they're at on the transponders.
Yeah, let's put it like this. When being asked for some final conclusion, I think there are more and more technologies which enable some kind of surveillance party to track behavior. If you move topology-wise, or if you what do you do at some places and stuff, we should just be aware of that. The problem is there is sometimes you can hear a stance from people like, "Oh, I'm an innocent guy. I don't have to fear anything. Where should be my problem with being tracked?" This is a very naive approach, as the same people asked about those technologies usually want to apply it on others, on the weak, kids or delinquents or Alzheimer patients. Do it with the others, but don't do it with me. And even if you did with me, where should be my problem? I am an innocent and honest citizen. This is rather naive. I think everybody of us has situations in his life when he doesn't want to be tracked, wherever we are then or what we do. And there's a constant move to data sources where this is, which enable the transparent society, and we should just be aware of that. And if I contributed with my talk to that awareness, I'm happy. So have a nice day.